Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 233 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on how to overcome the expectation bias. So this is a really fun podcast episode that I really liked because, you all know that I love clinical psychology, I love mental health, I love all of that side of psychology, but sometimes it is nice to take a break from it and actually return to cognitive psychology, which I finally admitted this week that I do rather like it. Because if you've been a long-term listener, then I've basically been saying that the more approaches to psychology, so the biological, cognitive, and social psychology, are not real areas of passion for me. But cognitive psychology, it does have its moments, like all of the sub-disciplines, even business psychology, which I almost loathe at this point because it has no interest in me whatsoever. But even that can have some interesting moments. So but definitely keep listening up because you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is a bit painful. That's such a bad pun. Pain sensitivity predicts support for political opponents. The idea that certain traits can make someone more likely to be politically conservative or liberal has received a good deal of attention. In fact, the BPS has written about it before. Now, Spike W.S. Lee and Sincella Ma at the University of Toronto report findings an individual difference that is linked not to a person's own political affiliation but to their level of support for some of the moral and political attitudes of the ideological opponents. The difference is in question to physical pain. Across a series of studies on more than 7,000 Americans, Lee and Ma consistently found that liberals who were more sensitive to pain reported great endorsement of some typically conservative stances. Those who were less sensitive, conversely, were less likely to be moved by conservative ideology. Wow, that is quite impressive, and that's actually quite a good finding, and we can't really argue against it too much unless the methodology is bad though, because they've tested it on over 7,000 Americans. Of course, it doesn't mean it replicates across all countries, all human cultures, but it's still quite a big sample size. I'm quite impressed, to be honest. And come on, if you're going to do it in any country, you've got to do political stuff in America because that country's so polarized, unfortunately. And besides that, I'm not really sure what else to say about this particular study because I'm not sure how you could apply this to everyday life, and I'm not sure how political campaigns could actually use this to their advantage. I just think it's such a weird, really cool finding because I never would have thought that it was possible for someone's pain tolerance, so something that's quite physical, to impact something as psychological and something as internal as someone's political endorsements. So really interesting finding that I guess you could argue links to the mind-body connection. So really interesting. And this is what I love the psychology news section, which you find weird findings at times. So moving on to the second one. What does ADHD self-care look like? People with ADHD face many more hurdles day to day than neurotypical people. Whilst not everyone's ADHD will manifest in the same way, many people have trouble with things such as organising, planning, and memory. Even when relaxing, symptoms can manifest which affect everything from mood to sleep. Addressing difficulties spanning so many domains requires not only a multidisciplinary approach and close collaboration between healthcare professionals and patients, but patients to become experts in applying coping strategies that work for them. A group of Linus University researchers explore some of these strategies in their latest research paper. Through their systemic review focused on input from participants who were professionally diagnosed with ADHD, they gathered insights from neurodiverse people themselves rather than healthcare professionals. Massive bonus, in my opinion, about interventions and their strategies for managing everyday life. So there are a few things I want to say about this. First of all, I completely support research that looks at service users themselves and actually talks to them instead of healthcare professionals, because these are the people that are actually living with the difficulties. These are the people that suffer, and these are the people that experience the negative and also the positives of their experiences. And these are basically a primary resource. Whereas healthcare professionals, as great as they are, and I want to be one myself, like one a day, as do like most of you podcast like listeners, and as we've had a direct lived experience of any mental health like conditions, we are only a primary resource and a primary source of facts, because we only rely on what we've read in text and academia, which in itself can be biased because of the publication bias, but we also only hear about coping strategies from our own therapeutic work and other interactions with our clients, which is always a good resource. But at the end of the day, though, our clients are the people that live with this day in, day out, so they are always the best experts on themselves. And then, the only other thing that I want to say though is that self care. If you're neurodivergent, yes, self care is so important. I am acknowledging that more and more these days, and it can be a bit of a nightmare. Like, my parents have actually been away for the past 2 weeks, and I've been really pushing myself because I want to be productive. I want to get tons of projects done because I've got all this free time. Of course, me not realizing how much time a master's degree takes up. So I think I have almost been close to burning out, especially Wednesday nights, to actually sleep for quite a while. Well, at some point, but self care, definitely do it. And this goes for everyone. Just be careful with how you are, and also just take time for yourself. It's really important. So the last one is reaching for the haptic horizon. Held hand tools extend the span of human touch. In fact, we are so exquisitely tuned to interpreting sensory information, such as tiny vibrations transmitted from tools as we use them, that they can give us all sort of touch type information. For example, if you were blindfolded and fitted with noise cancelling headphones and told to use only a fork to identify which of the two bowls that contain porridge and which contain chips, it would be easy, right? Yeah, it would. A typical fork is only 20 centimeters long, but wondered Luke E. Miller at Rambam University in the Netherlands and colleagues, how far beyond the body can tool touch go? Is there a haptic horizon, a sensory horizon for touch? And if so, how far does it extend beyond the body? Okay, this is actually quite interesting. In the new paper in the Journal of Neurophysiology, they described how they first used neuromechanical modeling to work out the theoretical maximum length of a rod that would give us useful touch information about the environment. And I really do recommend that you go and read the write-up at the BPS Digest website, because they found that a rod can be 6 meters and still provide us with useful touch information, which I think is amazing. And when I was doing the final year module called Cognition in Action at my university, I basically hated all of these topics. Any cognitive psychology topic in an academic setting, I am very likely to hate, including the topic known as peripersonal space, which is basically our personal space. So if I had learnt this fact back then, I probably wouldn't have given it too much notice, and I definitely wouldn't have found it interesting. But 6 meters, so we can use a 6 meter long rod and still use it to get touch information. That is amazing, and that's really impressive. And I guess that this just goes back to what I was saying earlier about cognitive psychology, or to be honest, any sub-discipline of psychology. We might not always like it, we might not enjoy learning about it, but we've got to be open to those odd moments where something really interesting does happen, like this in cognitive psychology, something that I personally I'm not always that bothered by. So I hope you enjoyed the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. Something that I really quite like about the third week of any new academic year is that things start to settle down, people start to find their rhythm, and conversations become so much easier. So I really am enjoying university at the moment, especially because I've sort of figured out how I work. Because sometimes I do some other work, I do some non-university work on my laptop during lectures. And this year I thought, I know, that's really bad, you shouldn't do this, you should only focus on your lecture. But I really cannot work like that at all. And because I can normally last about half an hour in any lecture, but after that I start to lose the focus. So if I do a bit of non-university work on my laptop, then I can refocus. So I think that's one unofficial tip. If you really struggle during lectures, maybe, I don't know, try and find something really small to do on your laptop that isn't university related. But again though, you've got to do what's good for you, and of course you've got to do something that still allows you to learn in your lecture theatres, because that's what you need to go forward if your exams, coursework, etc. But besides from that, universities have been really interesting, and with quite a few different lectures, and it's also been quite a busy week because I've had family medical stuff and a whole bunch of other things going on. But one thing I do want to mention is that I know I've mentioned a few times on the podcast before that I'm doing this master's dissertation, which I'm basically controlling, because I'm basically designing the study from scratch, and I'm basically running it all myself with my supervisor just watching me, just double checking things, etc. So this week I've been doing another quadric survey in formed consent forms, the ethics proposal, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I have to say, the way that my university does it is really quite easy and straightforward, and it's actually quite fun. And this is I never ever thought I would say about psychology research and actually designing my own study, because for the past 4 years I've not had any topics that I'm actually interested in enough to actually want to research. But now I found my topic, which I actually mentioned in today's podcast episode slightly. But now I'm actually doing another ethics proposal. Now I'm doing a whole bunch of other stuff. It is actually a lot of fun. It's really interesting, and I'm so excited for this year because I finally get to research something I'm passionate about. So I definitely think that the lesson for all of you here is actually a twofold. So one, if you're a student like me, or at least I was back in my undergrad, and you didn't have any psychology topics you were passionate about, or to be honest, that you really cared about, that's okay. It's perfectly normal, to be honest. In fact, I don't think that many people do at the undergrad level. And I've written it before, and I've actually said on the podcast before how you either need to pick the least worst project or make sure that you pick a supervisor that will actually make it lot of fun and is easy to work with. And even when it comes at your masters, the same sort of thing might have happened. But if you do find something you're passionate about then definitely research it, explore that option. Maybe contact some lecturers. But if you're passionate about something, I truly believe after this year that you've got to explore it, because after 4 years of not being passionate about a particular area in psychology and sort of feeling like I was wasting my time, it's such a valuable thing to actually have something that you're passionate and something that you're interested in. So just a little food for thought there. And then finally, something I do love about universities and something that I really like about university supervisors is that sometimes they have lab socials. So even though I'm actually with a new supervisor this year, my placement year supervisor and my final year dissertation supervisor for my undergrad, I'm still with him in the sense that if there's a lab social going on, I'm still invited. So that happened on a Thursday, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. I met tons of great people, learned some really weird stories about what happens in grammar schools, and tons of other stuff, including some quite disgusting stuff that I will not repeat on the podcast, but I've already repeated to tons of different people. So it was a lot of fun, and I also met a few listeners of the podcast, which was a really weird experience, but really good though. And so the reason why I'm mentioning that is that if you're stuck for a supervisor and you aren't that bothered about the project, definitely see if the supervisor does lab socials. That I really do recommend, because to be honest, they are some of the highlights of my social calendar at the moment, because I'm starting quite a lot of new social things. But the lab socials, they're very much psychology student focused, and because of that, they're a great way to meet other psychology students. So, as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So, you can always email me, connorwiley@connorwiley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwiley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi wiley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Cognitive Psychology, a guide to the neuroscience, neuropsychology, and cognitive psychology. So this is a great, really easy to understand book that really does help you to explore cognitive psychology in a lot more depth. It's definitely one of my longer psychology books, but that makes it a lot more fun and a lot more interesting, because it looks at stuff like attention, how vision works, memory, thinking biases, how thinking works, and a whole bunch of other really great aspects of a cognitive psychology, which is all about our mental processes. So this is definitely one of my top 10 psychology books that always sells lots of copies each month. So if you want to know what all the assignments about, then definitely check it out. So that is Cognitive Psychology, a guide to neuroscience, neuropsychology, and cognitive psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore, or local library if you requested. And you can get the ebook directly from me at patreon.com/conwiley. So whilst buying books helps us support the creation and the editing of the podcast, My time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons, and as always, a massive thank you to my patrons because your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you wanted to become a patron and get tons of great rewards, then you can now become a patron at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. So that's enough the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about how to overcome the expectation bias, and this is a thinking bias that negatively impacts how we feel when our expectations don't get met. This is a really fun podcast episode which I liked. So let's dive into it. What is expectation bias? None of us are strangers to the idea of expectations, because these are goals or dreams placed on us by ourselves, our friends, or our families, as well as the vast majority of them are artificial in the form of should statements. For example, you should become a doctor, you should achieve 100% on the test, and you should get married. These very high expectations that have the power to make us feel bad, worthless, and undeserving of good things if we fail to live up to them. This feeling isn't helped when those around us are disappointed and when they take their anger out on us. On the other hand, whilst the natural solution would be to lower our goals so it's impossible to be disappointed, you will run the risk of having no goals or expectations about yourself that anything good will happen. So this means you have nothing to look forward to in life, and that I think is really sad and might make you feel a little hopeless or lost as well. That's why having expectations are really important, but they need to be dealt with. The reason for this is because whenever us as humans try to make decisions, we always pretend to be perfectly logical, perfectly rational, and we believe that we make decisions based on facts. I love it how lay people try and describe thinking to me as if that's true. It seriously isn't. Especially because we have these pesky things called emotions, and our behaviour shortcuts any illogical thinking process that we try and set up to make this decision. This isn't always bad, but sometimes it is. That's why when it comes to us managing the difference between the actual outcome of something and the expected outcome is really hard, and why some argue it requires real emotional intelligence. For example, I know I have an awful RStudio statistics test coming up in January, and I've actually done some artwork over the weekend. It's not looking good. My expectation is relatively low, to be honest, and I expect that I will pass it, but I do not expect a merit or a distinction. That's the expected outcome, and I think I'm having a low expectation on purpose to my detriment, and I know I've got to try and be more positive about this. Yet, if I do get a merit in the test, then I will be amazed, seriously amazed, and really happy. But if I fail, then I will be seriously annoyed and outraged with myself, as well as I'll experience cognitive dissonance, which will happen in a moment. Then it will be a question of how good is my ability to manage this difference between a failure and my expected outcome of a pass. That's a little made up example, but the difference between those two outcomes can result in cognitive dissonance. A very unpleasant feeling indeed. How cognitive dissonance relates to expectation bias. So, if we cast our minds back to social psychology and Fez Singer, cognitive dissonance is the uncomfortable and awful feeling that we experience when our attitudes and beliefs don't match our behaviour. This links to expectation bias because our expected outcome is our attitude towards whatever the outcome was of, like my statistics episode, and the actual outcome is our real performance, which is a behaviour. Therefore, because this cognitive dissonance comes from our expectations, psychologists have named this the expectation bias, because this is a specific form of cognitive dissonance, since this is where our initial perceptions and thoughts impact our behaviour in the future. For example, if there was a promotion going at work and you were certain that you were going to get it during a very busy week where you did an amazing job according to your boss and you didn't get it, then you would be extremely disappointed. But if you hadn't had that expectation, then it would have been a normal working week. Another example is that if you're going to do a university group presentation, because I just did mine two weeks ago, and you thought that you did brilliantly, and it was a distinction grade, yet you only got a pass, that I say in air quotes, then believe me, you would be disappointed and seriously annoyed at your group, yourself and the marker. Because I know I would be, but thankfully my group was great. Again, though, if you didn't have the really high expectation, then you wouldn't have experienced the dissidence. On the whole, it is perfectly natural for all of us to get disappointed when we have really high expectations, desires, hopes, and beliefs that certain things will happen to us. Yet, the solution to this cognitive dissonance isn't to have lower expectations, it actually comes from a few different tips and tricks. How to overcome expectation bias. Expect differences. When it comes to having expectations, it can be useful to go into these different areas of our lives, expecting things to be different to what we expect, as well as it's a good idea to believe that these differences will actually make us better off and not poorer. For example, I know from personal experience that deviations from our plans make life a lot richer, more interesting, and it does benefit us, especially because I used to believe in my first and second year of my undergraduate that I would never like cognitive psychology research, and I was extremely adamant about that. I was almost well known for it. But I did some cognitive psychology research for my undergrad dissertation, and it was the best thing I ever could have done. I also had the same expectation about never ever wanting to do my own psychology research, because I hated academic research with a passion, even though I loved the project management side. That got me very good irritation within the school. So I think I hated the idea of designing a research study from scratch. And now I'm running my own research project on transgender people. I'm seriously loving it. Overall, expect differences and see them for the amazingly fun things that they can be. They're interesting, and the differences can sometimes be better than the original plan. Have an open mind. This connects to the last tip, because you will need to have an open mind to that these differences will be weird at times, yet they can be as good as what you were hopeful, or even better, and that's definitely happened to me in the examples above. Express yourself and carry on. Very British. Building upon this, whenever these differences pop up, tell other people how you feel, because this allows you to reflect on what happened, and other people can help you confront the effects that this is having on you. Yet the critical thing here is to make sure that you move on and you're open to forgetting about what happened. For example, this happened a lot during the first years of my undergraduate, because I was useless at academic writing according to my markers. It didn't matter how much I tried, I was flat out useless. So I moaned and complained to my friends and my family, but in the end I had to move on, and I honestly did try to keep learning academic writing. I kept barely passing, but I kept trying, and that kept me going into my placement year, when I actually learned how to write academically. Don't be rigid. I know I have a terrible habit of this. Whenever I focus on a goal, I always hyper-focus. And that means that some of the time I do fall short and fail, I say in air quotes. Therefore, what I should do is I should expect what a likely outcome might look like, but I shouldn't attach a judgment to these goals, and I should be more flexible in accepting them. A good example is I have a clinical psychology essay due next year, and let's say that I want to complete it in a week and it's 2,500 words. Then by the end of the week, I only have 1,800 words done. So by the standards of my goal, I failed because I haven't finished it, formatted it, proofreaded it, etc. However, I should look at it as a win because I've still gathered all the literature and done 1,800 words. So in this example, I would have to focus more on what I have done and remove the negative judgment from the expectation. Embrace change. And I know this is a very autistic thing to say, but that is scary for me. Seriously scary. As a result, to overcome expectation bias, we should seek to create an internal environment for ourselves where our beliefs, attitudes, and mental processes embrace change. This happens normally with our physical body through homeostasis, but our emotions don't do this naturally. There is no such mechanism for this in our mental processes. Therefore, we have to create this for ourselves by focusing on the fact that these differences between the expected and actual outcomes are normal. And to be honest, I think it's strange or weird if you always achieve your goals, no matter how big they are. Are you a witch or something? Conclusion. Overall, I hate it as much as you do when we don't achieve our goals. I love to have high, very ambitious goals, and it's annoying when I fail them, or I don't do as much as I want to do. And this is something I'm definitely realising as I continue my masters. I simply don't have the hours in the day that I used to. Yet, if we don't have some strategies or ideas to overcome the expectation bias, then I know from experience it can make us feel rubbish, down, and like we are nothing but failures. Yet, that's not healthy. So please, remember those tips about overcoming the expectation bias, and hopefully you'll bounce back quickly and enjoy life along the way. There's nothing wrong with having high expectations. And actually, I think ambitious expectations help us to make life more fun, joyous, and it certainly gives you a few more stories to tell when you need them. Thursday at the University Social definitely taught me that. A so-called failure has the power to make people laugh, appreciate you, and maybe even bond over a shared experience. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did. I definitely think thinking biases and cognitive psychology can actually be a really welcome break from time to time from clinical psychology. So I definitely enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. If you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Cognitive Psychology, a guide to neuroscience, neuropsychology, and cognitive psychology, available in all the usual places. And if you want to become a patron of the show, then check out patreon.com/the Psychology Word Podcast. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.